Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about Claritin. Claritin, also known as Loratadine, is known as a non-sedating antihistamine. Non-sedating because it's less likely to cross the blood-brain barrier than the old-fashioned antihistamines like Benadryl or Chlor-trimeton. It's not that they can't do it. It's just that they're less likely to get into the brain. Well, we know that this drug, often referred to as the #1 recommended antihistamine in the United States, treats allergies of various sorts, nasal allergies or allergic rhinitis or hay fever due to pollens or mold or dust or pets. It also is used for people who have chronic idiopathic urticaria or the hives. It's for relief of symptoms like a runny nose or sneezing or itchy or watery eyes or even itchy nose or throat. Now, Claritin by itself is sold as a tablet or a rapidly disintegrating tablet. It's also sold as a syrup or a chewable tablet. You can get Claritin D. It's combined with pseudoephedrine. And in different parts of the world, it could be combined with a painkiller. It could be combined with a steroid or even an asthma medicine. Now we even have Claritin anti-allergy pillows and Claritin anti-allergy comforters. Of course, they don't have any Claritin in them. Now, Claritin is on the World Health Organization list of essential medicines. It was patented back in 1981 when they thought it had potential as a non-sedating antihistamine. It was marketed in 1993. The patent finally expired in 2002, and then became over-the-counter, and the price dropped dramatically. And now we have Clarinex. Clarinex is simply a metabolic byproduct in the body of the Claritin. Well, taken orally, Claritin is quite well absorbed. It goes through what we call first-pass metabolism. It goes into the liver as Loratadine, and it comes out of the liver as desloratadine. Now, desloratadine is the active ingredient. That's the antihistamine that really works and causes relief of symptoms when indeed that happens. The peak effect is after an hour or two. The biologic half-life of Claritin is only 8 hours, but when it changes into desloratadine, the active ingredient, well, that lasts for about 27 hours in the body, maybe even as much as 92 hours in some people, depending on their ability to metabolize it. Finally, the drug is excreted mostly in the urine and in the feces, but Claritin can interact, because it has to go through the liver, with certain enzymes, and those enzymes can be altered by either ketoconazole or erythromycin, or maybe even tagamet or cimetidine, and grapefruit or grapefruit juice. They can all increase the amount of Claritin in the bloodstream. Now, fortunately, Claritin seems very safe. It's used in pregnancy, doesn't seem to have any special problem. Nursing mothers, again, no special problem. And in older people, again, no major problems. Here's the deal, though. They've done some randomized double-blind controlled studies, and what they found is that relief of symptoms with Claritin occurs in less than half of the people who take it, and relief of the symptoms in people who take an inactive placebo occurs in about 1/3 of the time. So 1/3 of the people who take a sugar pill get better, and less than half of the people who take the Claritin seem to get better. And as a matter of fact, in a Food and Drug Advisory Committee, they actually admitted, the company did, that the pill wasn't much more effective than simply doing nothing. And embarrassingly, one of the company studies on perennial allergies, perennial rhinitis, year-round, well, what they found was that there really wasn't any difference between taking the drug and taking the placebo. They failed to publish that in any abstract form. They failed to publish it in any journal. They just mentioned it in the package insert. But remember, there's a question, is the medicine really any better than placebo? Well, the reason it might not be is when the pollen or the dander stimulates some of the cells, like a mast cell, to degranulate, those cells release an awful lot of substances, only one of which is histamine. So if the antihistamine blocks the histamine, but you have 14 or 15 other substances floating around the body, well, you can see that the drugs might be somewhat less effective than you would like. Side effects are relatively minor from taking these particular types of drugs. Some people develop some sleepiness or headache, and occasionally there is dry mouth or urinary retention or maybe even some blurred vision or some gastrointestinal problems, constipation, and rarely is there ever an allergic reaction or a seizure or maybe even some sort of a liver problem. If you're going to take these drugs, you probably should discontinue them about 24 hours before you undergo any allergy testing. As we talk about the history of antihistamines, they really came into their own after World War II. And it's very important that you realize that those old-fashioned antihistamines probably have more effectiveness as antihistamines compared to the newer non-sedating medicines, but they do cross that blood-brain barrier and cause some drowsiness or some what we call psychomotor retardation, some mental fatigue. Now, Schering-Plough, the company that made the Claritin, they were already in the business of making antihistamines. They had Chlor-trimeton. First it was a prescription, then a non-prescription drug. But remember, it causes some mental cloudiness. But there's a big potential market for these allergic rhinitis drugs because it's thought in the United States right now about 35 million people suffer from allergic rhinitis. Schering-Plough had been looking for a non-sedating antihistamine ever since the 1960s. They thought they would have a blockbuster status. They thought it would be phenomenal for their bottom line if they could develop one, and they thought they did with a drug known as azatidine. It was also known and marketed as Optimine. Now, it was non-sedating in cats. Unfortunately, in humans, it's sedating. Well, the FDA had some concern back in 1987 about the drug. Actually, they had Dr. Sherwin Strauss, who they assigned as the case manager, to look into the drug. And what he found was that the drug really, at the dose of 10 milligrams, was no more effective than an inactive placebo. And in order for the drug to be effective, he thought the dose probably had to be about 40 milligrams. But if the drug was 40 milligrams, it would cross the blood-brain barrier, and it would cause some sedation in people. So then the drug company that had sought a label on the drug saying it was no more sedating than taking a sugar pill, and actually it's kind of like a sugar pill in a lot of ways, they wouldn't be able to do it. And then there was another problem. Some long-term studies in rats and mice showed that there was the formation of some liver abnormalities that might presage liver cancer, liver tumors. Well, according to the FDA, there was really no urgency to consider Claritin because they already had released a non-sedating antihistamine known as terfenadine or Seldane. So Claritin was sort of a Me Too drug. It was just an add-on drug. So actually they had two. They had Seldane and they had another one called Hisminol. And neither of those seemed to cause liver tumors. Well, when you have a new drug, the FDA carefully evaluates it for safety, but as far as effectiveness goes, they really don't study it too well. Actually, all that has to be demonstrated is that the drug is more active than an inactive placebo. Well, in 1989, they were almost getting ready to license the drug. And then they had a reorganization within the FDA. The drug was taken over by a different division, and there was another antihistamine on the market known as doxylamine. And doxylamine, still around today as an antihistamine and as a sleep aid, in high doses was found to cause liver tumors in rodents. So then the FDA started evaluating more carefully some of the toxicology studies. And then there was a totally unpredicted event. In 1989, a woman, while driving, lapsed into a coma. She lost consciousness. Well, what's that got to do? She was taking Seldane. And it just so happened, not only was she taking Seldane, but she was given ketoconazole to prevent a yeast infection, and nobody knew at the time, but Seldane interacted with erythromycin and with ketoconazole to cause potentially fatal cardiac arrhythmias. So as a result, of course, the FDA made the drug company send letters to all the doctors saying, hey, be careful. And then they put a black box warning on. But what that also meant was that we had 2 drugs come off the market. So now we didn't have a non-sedating antihistamine. So Loratadine finally got the go-ahead. When they got the go-ahead, the company started spending hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising. They really were aggressively marketing this drug because they thought that for every $5 or $6 in advertising, for every $1 in advertising, they could bring in $5 or $6 in profit. Well, Claritin became the best-selling antihistamine of all time, and also the most lucrative. It was bringing in amounts per year well in excess of $2.5 billion. And as a matter of fact, the drug cost you, the consumer, for 1 month, somewhere between $80 and $105. That's for an antihistamine, a simple pill. Actually, a third of the company revenues were derived just from making this particular drug. Well, they kept trying to extend the patent because of the long time it took them to get through the FDA. They had some shenanigans. They tried to get it okayed as a pediatric drug. So they did a study for less than $3 million, and that gave them an extra 6-month extension on their patent, during which time they earned another almost $1 billion. And then, as a last-ditch effort, according to the New York Times article, what happened is that they tried to attach some language to a military appropriation bill that would give them some extra time on patent. But finally, the drug came off of patent. Schering-Plough wanted to keep generics off of the market for as long as they could, for 2 reasons. 1, to keep the price of the drug up, and 2, because they were coming out with Clarinex. Clarinex, or desloratadine, is the active product that the body metabolizes Claritin to. Well, there was another problem. They were all set to bring out Clarinex, and then the FDA found manufacturing problems in 4 plants, 2 in Jersey and 2 in Puerto Rico. And what happened is that with Schering's drugs, they found probably about 128 drugs were coming from these factories where there were some lapses in quality. And there was a whole bunch of question about whether there was some greed involved and questionable practices. Led to about a $500 million fine, and they kicked out the president of the company. Well, in December of 2001, matter of fact, in 1998, Anthem, the insurance company, said to the FDA, hey, we want you to consider allowing these antihistamines, the non-sedating antihistamines, including Claritin, to go over the counter, even though they're patented, because they're costing so much money. Well, the FDA said okay to that, but it wasn't binding on the manufacturers. So it was not until 2002 when Claritin came over the counter. Now, when a drug comes over the counter and becomes generic, when the first generic drug comes out, the price generally drops by about 10 or 20%. But when a variety of generics are available, when competition takes place, the price falls by about 80% or so. So if we look at the price of Claritin when it was a prescription drug, Claritin sold for about $3 a pill. Now you can buy Claritin over the counter. It costs 40 or 50 cents a pill. You can buy the generic Loratadine, made by lots of manufacturers, for 4 or 5 cents a pill. So that's how much the price has fallen. Claritin, $3 or so a pill. On prescription, off prescription, about half a buck a pill. Some people sell it for even as much as $1 a pill now. But the over-the-counter generic, 4 or 5 cents. Well, also you have to realize that you can buy some of the first generation antihistamines, the Benadryl or the Chlor-trimeton. They're very inexpensive, and half of the people who take them don't have any symptoms of drowsiness or mental fatigue. But the thought was that, hey, why should we even chance it? Because someone else is paying for it. We've got those insurance companies paying for it. Let them go take the hit. But the problem is that it's not the insurance companies taking the hit, it's you, the people paying the premiums for the insurance. And there's always the question, if you look at the Benadryl, that might cause the drowsiness in some people, what would happen if we used a lower dose? Would a lower dose be as effective as an antihistamine, but still not cause the drowsiness? Something to think about. Well, let's take a moment and let's focus on Clarinex. Remember, Claritin is Loratadine. You take the drug, and it's metabolized in the liver to desloratadine. All Clarinex is desloratadine. Primary metabolic breakdown product in the body, nothing new, nothing fancy. Of course, since it's already gone through the liver, you don't have to worry about taking ketoconazole and Izeril or erythromycin or grapefruit juice or anything else. The drug became marketed in January of 2002 and has a patent that's going to extend until 2019, but there are lots of patents, so they might not even come off until 2021. But some people think that it's just a ripoff, that they're ripping off the insurance companies and ripping off the people because, after all, this drug sells for as much as $7 or $7.50 a pill in some markets, when you can get the generic for 3 cents a pill, 4 cents a pill, 5 cents a pill. You get it as Loratadine and let the body go do the rest. And, as a matter of fact, Clarinex is on the list of do not use. It's considered one of the worst pills by worstpills.org, which is part of the Public Citizen group. It's considered no better than any of those cheap, safe, generic drugs. Now, unfortunately, we know that about 7% of the people in the country are poor metabolizers of desloratadine. So desloratadine gets in, but 7% of the people have a little difficulty getting it out. And in those people, side effects may occur. Now, it's not 7% overall. It's 7% of the total population, 20% of African Americans, and only 2% of either Caucasians or Hispanics. And when you're a slow metabolizer, then you have a greater chance of having that drug get to a high enough concentration and maybe cross the blood-brain barrier. Pharmacology professor from the University of Florida actually commented on what everybody knows, that the major treatment for nasal allergies, for allergic rhinitis, is not an antihistamine at all. They can help prevent some of the symptoms, but once you develop the attack, once you start with a runny nose, once you start with the sneezing and the itchy eyes, you're trying to close the barn door after the cows have gone. What you really need is a intranasal steroid, a nasal spray. Those seem to be the best. Actually, those nasal corticosteroids are the primary treatment according to most of the guidelines from national organizations. Well, other thing that you have to remember is that if you're going to take a second-generation antihistamine, we have lots of them, and there really isn't much difference between any of them, whether you take Allegra, which is probably the most potent, or its generic alternative, fexofenadine, whether you take Claritin or its product known as Loratadine, or Clarinex and desloratadine, or whether you take Zyrtec and cetirizine, or Xyzal and levocetirizine, they're all basically the same. And remember, if you get the generic alternative, much cheaper, but the thing that you should do if you have the symptoms is you should use either Flonase or Nasonex, or you should use Rhinocort, or preferably you go get those steroids in the generic form. You'll feel better, and you'll save a lot of money. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Ken Landau.